So going forward, we've got a lot of feasts coming up in the next few months, especially as far as the sort of ones that Gnostics like to celebrate. So I was mentioning before, Michaelmas is at the end of September. And Rudolf Steiner was really big into Michaelmas. I was telling Dinah earlier that I've been, it's one of those things that just keeps, smacking me that I should be, incorporating more of this. And so I'm hoping that we can maybe celebrate something with Michaelmas then, and at least this idea of bringing the archangels and the use of the angels more into the Gnostic practice in various ways.
So Pam, what date is Michaelmas? Does it correspond with the vernal equinox?
Yeah, or it's just slightly after that. So when I were looking at that set of means, this would fall right smack on the equinox, which might make it kind of hard for those of us who celebrate that. But if we go the next week, I think the 29th is often one of the days given to Michaelmas. And I think that's something to, really look at, how do we incorporate, because working with the angels was certainly something that the ancient Gnostics and early Christians did. And if we go into the sort of Platonic, the Platonist theurgies were largely about working with the angels, or at least with the daemon, as far as like how the idea of the daemon maybe fits with some of our modern ideas of angels. And but it's something I've done a little bit in the past, like to do more. If we do it here, you have to run up to sometimes we've actually gone to the Angel of the North just for a bit of celebration at that.
Because Pam, in some of the Easter rituals that we did, weren't the four angels called upon? I can't remember.
I think the four angels get called upon in a couple of the different special works. I have seen Gnostic masses where they actually, in the beginning, call the four archangels associated with each of the directions. Mm-hmm. And there's one of the Manichaean prayers I use. They call the angels in there after having kind of called the directions. Mm. So I think that's a tradition that must really go way back.
I was going to say it's also in kind of Jewish mystical practices like macabre and things like that, where the four angels are called upon for protection.
Yeah. And I suppose it probably has its roots like anything that's so deep there, going back into, the old Sumerian, Chaldean world, or mystical Zoroastrian. It seems to be at the root of everything. So we've got that. Then 2 weeks earlier than that, sorry, I'm going backwards, which isn't, but let's see, sorry. September 8th corresponds to the celebration that's in the 8th versus the 9th. It's also the descent of Mary. I talk, and Stefan would see that as the descent of Sophia. Now, John Monjovi disagrees, but well, is it John? Is it Stefan? I've always done it as the descent of Sophia, and because it corresponds with the birth of Mary too. 2 weeks before that, we've got the Festival of the Transfiguration, which of course I think almost one of the most Gnostic of this sort of transition that happens with Jesus. And then 2 weeks before that is the Assumption of Assumption of Sophia, or the Assumption of Mary. John likes to flip those two. I think partly because in his mind, he thinks that the descent should come before the Assumption. But I see these as being, I see the whole feminine and Mary cycle as being like a separate cycle within the whole yearly cycle of the church. So I don't have any problems with the Assumption coming before the descent. In fact, I think the Assumption then, it kind of kicks off the descent, which starts kicking off the whole, pre-Christmas coming of the light thing, which corresponds better to the Pistis Sophia in my mind. And then 2 weeks from today, we've got the Festival of Mary Magdalene. So there's a series of more feminine rituals, kind of in the way, in the coming months. And I think historically it makes sense, because a lot of I think the Sibyl and some of the Demeter festivals were more around the harvest time. So, and I think there's some other ones too around the Mary Magdalene, where there had been some festivals associated with Sirius and maybe even with the Shekinah. I seem to remember something like that at some point. So good stuff ahead. So as far as business, that's really kind of as a schedule, that's all I have. I will be getting a website up before the end of the month. I know, I got to do it. I have to do it. I'm giving a talk on Gnosticism and Theosophy coming up on August 7th, I believe it is. And I really want to have a website set up before that talk. And so I'll send the link when it's available to me, but it will be through the Theosophical Society in the Philippines.
Right.
So I want to have some place for those guys to go. So, okay. Does anyone else have anything before we get started with main sort of theme of tonight's lecture? Warren, you look hot there as well.
Beautiful. I was working on my church. I was putting a wood burner stove in there, but my wife phoned me. She's in London with her dad. He came up from the Ukraine, so this is why I came in late. So excuse me, please.
All right.
I was going to say, Warren, how's the church building looking?
It's very good. There's 3 things I've just been doing to it. I put a gutter on there to collect the rainwater, and I fitted homemade filters on there using biological filters. I've used hemp, for example. It's, linen material. That's one filter. Then, these washing pads that a copper, you get some steel washing pads. I put that down in the drain pipe. That'll take out the big stuff. And then the other thing I'm putting is a Chinese wood burner. And I've had problems with that. It just won't fit. The pipe work is all the same. It can't slot together because they're both the same size. So that's giving me a headache. But I've done that now. And I've put a solar panel and a battery. So I've got to do the wiring for. So the light is probably emanating from me eventually with a bit of luck. But for the now, it's coming from the solar panel.
Great.
So it's coming on good, but it's not ready to. There's something I wanted to show you, which I was looking at Turge's, Turge, of course, sometimes he's been on here. I noticed some of his artwork in the early days was really interesting. Let me see if what I like. I want someone, and I do know someone who could do, I'm hoping, that as a big poster on the wall when you.
Oh, yeah.
What do you think of that?
I like that.
Pam, didn't you get some images turned into textiles for hanging?
Yeah. Let me show you one of those from Turja.
Okay.
Because that might be really nice. Well, rather than a poster, have a wall hanging made of material that would look that would look probably a little bit more ecclesiastical.
I agree. I was going to paint the wood, but I thought, no, I won't do that. I'll do some wall hanging. But I don't.
So-
yeah, I like this. Bring it closer, Pam.
So this is one of Terje's pictures. And I went to mypicture.com, and where they put things on canvases, but for fairly reasonably, usually under 20 pounds, sometimes cheaper depending on their sales. They'll put them on nice little fabric, and it comes with little hangers, and the hangers just connect. The hangers just connect with magnets. So your fabric just goes in, and I like these because they take up less space.
Yes, I like
They're
that.
inexpensive, they take up less space, and still, so you can have different sort of theme ones. And I've got a number of different images, some from him and some other ones I've pulled off the web. Also, probably should turn off the recording to say this. They don't seem to be very snooty about any sort of copyright stuff.
Mhm.
You know, I've had trouble with Snapfish. Or it's one of them, you know, but this place, it's out of Germany, but still it's really affordable from a British.
It has a don't ask, don't tell policy, Pam, on the
I
copyright.
think so. or they're not responsible if I'm violating it.
Yeah, they're asking you to take radical responsibility for your own morality.
That's right.
Well, what you have behind you on the wall, there's another one I was interested in.
Oh, wow.
Wow, that's nice. Yeah.
That's quite Manichaean as well.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. Maybe you've got some suggestions. Maybe you've got some images you can share. I can have a look. And I wonder what size these wall hangings can go to. Because the one you showed me there is about an A3 size.
Yeah, the ones I've got here, they're about I think they're about 30 centimeter by 30 centimeter, something like that. But I think there might be other ones, and I think there's other places one can get textiles made.
What sort of word should I look? What sort of company should I be looking for? A wall hanging company? Or?
This one is just this is just a regular one that prints your photos on canvas.
Oh, okay.
So a lot of the places that will, like, you know, make canvases out of whatever your photos are, will also, a lot of them have started doing the hangings as well.
Really nice. No, I like
Kind
the
of a
idea
retro.
to have many of these, including some of Serge's, around the church wall, you know. And then I might have a full-size photograph of Steve as well. You know, that's the magic corner.
Is that like a warning? This is where you could end up if you don't follow the path of righteousness.
Have your image, you know, it's kind of like, you know, when you go into with the holy water, so you have some of the demonic images at some churches.
That'd be brilliant. And Robert, the Taoist in the other corner, you know, standing there. Oh yeah, marvelous.
But yeah, a lot of these places where you can have these things done, really, it's very nice that you could have these sort of customized Gnostic images these days. And
yeah, I could do it. Yeah, thanks, Steve, Pam, for the ideas. That's a good. I wrote it down. I'm going to look into that now.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let me go and do this share here. Okay.
Wow, this is up to date. 14th of July.
Yeah. Let's see. My there we go. Start out with a little bit of a kind of a reading meditation. So you can either read with me or you can close your eyes and think. It's by Richard Rohr, a native and Celtic spirituality initiation. Life and grace seem to move us along, often without our notice, toward greater maturity, inclusivity, and non-dual wisdom. But at certain points along the way, we're prone to getting stuck unless we have some kind of initiatory experience, some kind of healing rite of passage, and almost always the aid of guides or elders. When our familiar way of living is challenged by any new wisdom, any great love or great suffering, we are unlikely to let go of past certitudes because of the unknown and the lack of control. It's just too scary. Our culture has unfortunately lost the rather universal tradition of initiation. And there are now few true elders to lead us onwards. Instead of rites that encourage us to let go and begin anew, we are urged, both by the Roman Church and society, to perform better, to do the right thing, and to be more successful. We gun our already existing engines. I believe that without some inner experience of powerlessness and the wisdom that potentially comes from it, most individuals would misunderstand and abuse power. And Paul will call this the folly of the cross. Native religions emphasize harmony, balance, and wholeness as goals that follow authentic initiation, instead of merely providing people with a list of do's and don'ts. A religion of mere moral requirements, in my experience, just leaves people in a continuous seesaw of deflation and inflation, and with a strong undercurrent of denial and delusion. The search for balance and harmony, darkness and light, winter and spring, angels and demons, was more of the primitive way of keeping us safely inside the always truthful, paschal mystery of Jesus. It takes a contemplative mind to be content with such paradox and mysteries. The daily calculating mind works in a binary way. Either or thinking gives us one false sense of control. The small mind works by comparison and judgment. The great mind works by synthesizing and suffering with alternative truths. The ego cannot stand this suffering, and that is exactly why it is hard for many religious people to grow up. Initiation-based religion is not moralistic, but mystical and contemplative, and eventually unitive. It unveils the Great Spirit in all things and in us, and then we are able to live with all the seemingly contradictions between, with no primal need to eliminate them until we learn what they have to teach us. Most primitive traditions worldwide have initiation rites for both men and women in various forms. For women, these are usually fertility or puberty rites, as with the Navajo people, the Dene, whose Kindalada ceremony ushers adolescent girls into womanhood. In the Celtic tradition, some people choose voluntary exile from Ireland, a permanent pilgrimage to unknown destination, placing themselves entirely within God's hands. In Native American vision quests, the initiate cannot return to the village until he knows his sacred name has met the Great Spirit. Perhaps this pattern of self-discovery of one's true name in God is the heart of initiation. See Revelations 2:17. And after all, life is not a matter of creating a special name for ourselves, but uncovering the name we've already had. We're not just spiritually named. Historically, people are usually marked with their body too, like Jacob being wounded on his hip by the angel. The remaining wound tells us that we have gone the distance and completed the cycle. I can take it. I am not a victim, but renewed is the message. No wonder the image of the risen Christ is still wounded. I wonder if the prevalence of hazing, tattoos, and body piercing is not a secular superstition that young men once thought by fasting, circumcision, scarification, shaving of heads, and knocking out teeth. True initiation marks you indelibly and gives you your sacred name, not only when it's accompanied by interior sacred wounding that reminds you both that life is hard and that you are indeed wounded and powerless before the mystery of full life. Initiation teaches you both dark and light. Joy and grief, good and evil are always part of the journey. No part can be excluded without breaking the whole, which is always a benevolent universe. This is a non-dual reality of our human evolution and existence. Native and Celtic people depended much more on initiatory experience that changed our consciousness than on a list of do's and don'ts that were supposed to enlighten you by supposedly moral behavior. I've yet to see mere moral behavior enlighten anyone. It does, however, usually make them usually easier to live with. So this came across my feed just a couple of days ago, and I thought this was a good lead-in to talking about the major orders. Because within the Gnostic Church, we've always approached clerical orders as a sort of initiation. And I think one of the complaints may be that while we've used clerical orders as initiation, we fail to recognize there's other potential initiations too that could be available to both clergy and non-clergy. As I work with students in astrology, talk about when do these cycles happen. And the fact is that within a period of a month, the moon goes all around the astrological chart. So there's this possibility of initiation and rekindling of all 360 degrees of experiences every month. So there's always the opportunity for change. And there's always this opportunity for progression. And I think that's an important thing to remember, both as individuals and as clergy. You don't have to be stuck. You're only stuck if you let yourself be stuck. So. This is a bit of a reminder. These are the minor orders that we went over last week. And then these are the major orders that we'll be talking about tonight. Both the subdeacon, the deacon, the priest, and the bishop. In the Gnostic Church, sometimes we use the category of the archpriest. I'll be talking a little bit about what that means. And then there's usually one or more individuals who either by having it bestowed upon them, election, or self-proclamation, bear the title of primate. Yeah. And I always have found this to be a very funny title. And I know one, it goes to be the first in the maid, but I think it just, speaks of our monkey order. And, can't take that too seriously. One way to think about the major orders of difference is in terms of how do they act within a church service, a large scale church service. And the main difference, I think this go back, Steve and I were talking about the difference between an acolyte and a subdeacon, is that really the major orders within the church service can live in this world. And they are really the only people who are, I don't want to say allowed, but are allowed to be at or behind the altar. So the minor orders, we may have a reader come up, but they only are as far as this far usually to the lectern for the epistles. And then the acolyte may come up here and light candles. But once the service has started, or unless the candles go out, they stay in front of the altar. They're not going behind. So it's this transition of handing anything, crossing this area, this crossing, once the service is started, that's actually done by the subdeacon. So once the purification has started to happen, it's the subdeacon that will usually carry anything into the congregation itself. That's one way to think about it. So very quickly, the subdeacon, it's largely the transition from the major to the minor to the major orders. And he handles all of the instruments after the start of the service, but really prior to consecration. So the subdeacon doesn't touch any of the chalice or paten or anything else after it's been consecrated. Outside of the regular service, the subdeacon performs, also works as the assistant to the deacon. In a large church community, the deacon can actually has a lot on their plate, and we'll be getting to that. And of course, all of the major orders, to get to the major orders, someone has to come all the way through the minor orders. So by the time you're at this point, you can perform anything lower. So the subdeacon may be performing a lot of the duties of an acolyte. Now, this is all thinking about a huge, big church. In the reality of most Gnostic congregations, there may be a bit more of a slush between what the acolyte does and what the subdeacon does. Simply our practicality. Now, the subdeacon, the deacon, is the first of all of these roles that we actually read about in the New Testament. And when we start thinking about, how is the early church described there? There is references to both deacons, and then in the writings of the early church fathers, also to deaconesses. So women were clearly involved at this level of ministry. And even now within the Roman Church, there are still deaconesses, and in the Orthodox Church as well. So one of the key responsibilities, and this is what we read about in the New Testament a lot, is that the deacon was responsible for the training of the catechumen. They're a training of people who are coming to become Christians. And he or she would take the new person through their basic training and through the rites of baptism and even confirmation if people are doing confirmation. And that the deacon was responsible for baptism gives us a big clue into why women were involved at this level. Mainly because in a lot of the traditions, baptism was a full submersion. And in some traditions, baptism also included, getting rid of your old clothes and putting on brand new clothes. So as you imagine, for modesty alone, there was a need to have, separate women, and to avoid any sort of sense of impropriety, to have women doing, baptizing other women, and men baptizing men. At the church service, during the standard Eucharist, the deacon also begins, they're the only ones with the priest who read from the Gospels. Independently, the deacon also may lead Matin services and Vespers. And they're also allowed to administer Eucharist. So what that means is that and this goes into some of the larger churches, think that the deacons might also be involved with visiting people who are infirmed, visiting people who are ill and cannot come to a church service themselves. And this is why it would be really handy to have a subdeacon to help, work with all these things. If you're responsible for training new people and visiting the sick, and baptism, it could be a lot of work. Now, it's important here, and I underlined administer, because what the deacon can do is to administer Eucharist, and the elements that have already been consecrated. They don't consecrate. That begins at the authority goes with the priest. But they are allowed, once the elements have been consecrated, to take those or take portions of them and administer this to the ill. And this actually, what?
Sorry, I was just going to say that within the Church of England, the deacon is usually the stepping stone to becoming the priest. So everyone who gets ordained, goes through theological training, is expected to be a deacon probably for about 12 months. Some people stay as deacons, but that's quite unusual within the Church of England. But within Baptist type churches, often people remain deacons and that's all they do. That's their thing.
Yeah, I think in the Protestant, this is considered to be is often a plateau in itself. I think also in some Protestant churches, this sort of role is there, but it's not necessarily very formal.
Yeah, it's not. It doesn't involve an ordination as such, but I think most Protestants have got a view on ministry that's less kind of initiatory, shall I say?
Yeah. I know in the churches I grew up, there would be maybe reference to people as being elders who might do some of this, or often it was just called the assistant to the pastor. One of
Okay.
these rotating jobs that
Yeah.
someone would do. And often it had to do with, in the Eucharist ceremony, we would have the pastor would often go through first and administer, give out the bread, give out the body, followed by an assistant pastor, often a woman. In the most recent Lutheran church I'd gone to, who would then give the blood, give the wine. And I always found that a very nice balance. So the priest then is responsible for training upper level clergy, but also training the minor clergy and the clergy that's underneath them. Leads the mass. And the big thing is that the priest consecrates the elements during the Eucharist. So that's, so while the deacon, and one of the reasons I've actually, within the recent years, the role of the deacon had gained a little bit more prominence in the Roman Church, where there's been a shortage of priests, of actually using deaconesses and deacons to administer consecrated elements. Now, in the sort of small clergy situation, like we are often in, the priest does everything that they haven't been able to, get an accolade of someone else to do. But this is kind of the big church way of thinking about it. Now, I mentioned the archpriest because it kind of will work with what we talked about before. It's really at the level of archpriest where there's the ability to ordain the minor orders. And also archpriests can have special responsibilities, such as, like when I was an archpriest, I was given vicarship over the Oblates of Holy Sophia. So there may be special responsibilities archpriests would do.
Again, in the Anglican Church, that probably has parallels in either they have an archdeacon who's kind of one below the bishop, and they also have something called area deans, who are effectively the senior member of clergy, before the bishop. So they're like the senior priest for the diocese.
What are they called again?
Area deans. Like they're called a dean. Like you can have a dean of a cathedral.
Okay.
You can also have a diocesan dean, who is kind of like they're appointed by the bishop, but they're usually the most experienced senior priest in that area.
Okay, that makes sense.
And they do lots of the spiritual direction and stuff.
Yeah, I was thinking that, it makes sense. And I think all of this is a bit about what needs to be done for the area itself, and how can everybody best serve. In my thinking, when we talk about how does this work monastically, that when we read the stories about the wandering monks, especially like, in the Celtic stories, it's fairly clear that most of those monks would have been ordained as priests, because they're actually, they're giving last rites, and last rites often includes some sort of communion, some sort of Eucharist. so it seems to me that most of the wandering monks, mendicant monks, would have had orders as a priest. And within an abbey for an abbey to be self-sufficient, you also would have had the abbot or abbess in charge would have had to be able to ordain these minor orders. Because without that, you're having to, rely on a bishop coming in, which I would think might be a shakeup on the, especially within the female convents. And actually, that was an issue when we read about the female convents. The convents had a lot of power, kind of going up until about the 7th century. And it was really only in the 7th, 8th century that the Roman Church started to mandate the Eucharist as the major celebration and something that was required of all, of all Christians, and which you think was really kind of a big power thing. Now, this caused a problem with the all-female convents because, of course, they had no priests within their midst. Yet, so how are they to get this sacrament? And also there was this desire not to have any sort of contact with men. Well, how do you make this transition happen? Some of it happened via deaconesses, but then your deaconesses had to be exposed. So it created a, quite conflict. But it's interesting to think that it was only so late that the Eucharist became institutionalized as the major sacrament, that before that, you actually had a lot of services focusing on the Psalms, focusing on readings and on contemplation and mystical thought. And finally, we've got the bishop. The bishop has the ability to ordain in the major orders and ordain priests. They're also nominally, traditionally have had the power to consecrate things such as oils, church, furniture such as, altar stones, bells, chimes, anything to be used in the service. The bishop has a lot of administrative control. So they're there to settle disputes between clergy. Not that any of those things ever happen. And also to manage the, functions of the diocese. And it's during the consecration of the bishop that apostolic succession is passed. So now to make a bishop, traditionally it requires 3 different bishops. So there needs to be some sort of consensus on that, but of course that bends depending upon what is practical. So this is, do I have another slide? Yeah. This is my take and my understanding on these things, and also what I've been taught. As I said, what happens beyond the point of bishop is partly of whether or not there's a really recognized primate, which rarely happens within Gnostic churches. Most Gnostic bishops either are report to a primate by the will, and many are autocephalous, which means they may be part of a general congregation. A general sort of church, church group, but they they really don't have to report to anyone. When I was consecrated, one of my consecrators said, yes, I'm making you, autocephalous as far as our church is concerned. But don't worry, if you really screw up, I'll come back and get you. So I'll let myself be known. So does anybody have any questions or comments about this? No. I do want to share one little thing. Let me grab another clip. Now, as I was telling Steve, I've actually done terrible things to my book budget, damage. But one of them was also finding out about this book. This is Lothenstow's Missal and Hours of Bangor. And this is a combination of a translation and reprint of some researchers who had tried to pull together what information was available on old Celtic churches. And some of the rites in here reportedly go back to the 6th century, and go back to the earliest written copies we have of the Celtic church. And there's some wonderful things in here. One of them, they were talking about baptism and emergency baptisms. Now, I was always taught, even as a Lutheran, that any Christian in a case of emergency can baptize someone else. It's if a person says they want to convert and they're about to die, or a child hasn't been baptized and they're about to die, it is simply a matter of laying on your hands or laying, above them as much as you can, as I baptize you in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. That's simple. That's simple. Of course, some other priest will probably want to redo it if it's not the emergency, but yeah. But anyway, they actually talk in here about what do you do if a woman is in childbirth and is having trouble in delivery, and you're worried about the baby. And they talk about administering, essentially blessing the water, and then giving her the water to drink as a way of baptizing the child within her, which I thought was kind of lovely. And anyway, there's some confessions and there are litanies in here that are very environmentally friendly, and very much this idea that the Celtic people had about, there being two books. There's both the gospel, two ways to learn, two books God has given us, both the gospel and the book of nature. So there's a lot of reference in here about the book of nature in here too. So it's that
family, that's the book there, the title, and the Hours of Bangor. Is that related? Because I think it was in this book, or maybe another one recently I was reading. This is The Secret Adam. It's Mandaean. But
yeah.
It was saying around about the 6th century, this is when all the saints came over to the whole of Great Britain, escaping the power of the Romans, and they set up an abbey in Bangor, which is just down the coast here. Now I was in Bangor just the other day. I go through there on a regular basis, and I need to find this little chapel what was set up in 600 AD.
Yeah, that would be,
because that book you have there must relate to that chapel.
I would think so.
It's a very important chapel, I read.
Yeah, and there's references to other places in Wales around here in there, and there's some translations, I couldn't find it real quickly, that are just very beautiful and very naturalistic. compared to how we usually think about them in an English term. And if you buy the book, go to lulu.com. Amazon wants a fortune. It's actually published by Lulu. So
Okay, I will. I'll have a look at that. Lulu.com. There's a priest from London, no, a Welsh priest. He's written a book and he's used Lulu to publish it. He was telling me a few months ago.
and what's his book?
I don't know the name. His name is Gareth.
Uh-huh.
He's been a priest right from the beginning, you know, as soon as he could be. So he's had a ministry, churches in the hills here, speaks Welsh. Nice guy, real nice guy.
Okay, cool. Cool. So, okay. Now, this is what I had for a major presentation. I do have a little video clip that I always think of when I think of the ordination. It's rather, I suppose, a bit disrespectful, but I think it's kind of interesting and fun at the same time. From one of my favorite movies. So I'm gonna pause the recording for a minute. So I always think of that scene, and it's a favorite, and I know maybe it may seem a bit disrespectful and all, but it's actually a wonderful film. I don't know if you guys have seen it. And it's about that the war between the angels on heaven, again, more angel stuff, Dinah, angels on heaven has still been going on. And this main character who had this vision during his ordination, which actually takes him out of the faith for a while, is actually kind of called back and as part of his duties in the police to get involved with these odd crimes that happen to be the angels. But it's Christopher Walken as Gabriel. what's not to like? But I think that idea, you know, also of seeing too much, and maybe are we ready for wanting these sorts of visions of eternity, visions of the divine? Are we really necessarily prepared for what we're going to get? It makes for an interest, you know, it's an interesting question, or it's a personal contemplation, I think, whenever we're about to go into any sort of initiation or any sort of new commitment. I know in the Masonic order I belong to, during the initiation, apprentice initiation, there's a sign that, you know, do you really, the candidate is asked, do you really want to go forward? Because there are some doors, once open, can never be closed. And initiations are like that.
Yeah, actually, Dionysus quotes the same type of initiation. There's certain levels of initiation that are only available to certain awareness, certain people with certain levels of awareness.
Yeah, and I think that's true. I also, people can go through a ceremony and not be initiated is another real kind of fact of it, because I always believe, like, some traditions teach that you're actually probably initiated before that ceremony happens. And often, I know people will talk about this, it's a common experience that before you're going to have the initiation, things happen. So the real initiation happens usually in your life beforehand, not after. And
yeah, in some ways the ceremony is a recognition of what's already taken place.
Yeah, it's a good way of putting it.
yeah, I think that's exactly true.
I think there's an answer given for this, Pamela, Stephen, Dinah. It's in this book again. I found this very useful book. I know you've got a copy of this. And I've often wondered, why is society split 50-50? Like on Brexit, like on any poll in Europe, in Sweden, in France, why is it that people go 50-50? And I wonder why, if people are aware, there are certain levels of awareness, but is it a 50-50 split in the population of spiritual awareness, and maybe 20% are really aware? Well, the answer, maybe the answer is this, because and I was trying to find the page, but it says in chapter 2, the father and the mother, the alphabet. When a man becomes a priest, and that in fact could be a woman, but this was written in 1962 by a lady, E.S. Drower. But when a man becomes a priest, he must divest himself of the mother and put on the father. In other words, must put off that which is earthly and identify himself with that is spiritual. Now that's interesting, because in here, if I could find the page, what it basically says, when the soul is allocated, the souls are allocated, and there are certain seals that are put on the soul, and then also, and you know that there's one here, one here, one here. These seals are on us. I don't know where they are, but that's where they are. But I don't know how you see them. But what he was saying there is, this female entity, the Earth, the Mother Earth, she chooses her soul, which souls are going to be hers, and the father chooses his. So the souls that have been chosen by the mother, they will return to the mother, i.e. to the earth. I mean, there's your recycling. But the ones that are chosen by the father, they will go to the father, and there's no dispute between the two. It says here, there's no dispute, there's no animosity. That is the way it is, and I found it very interesting. And maybe that's why some people are awake, because it's preordained, it's pre-decided. It's like Einstein and whoever, what was it? To do with quantum physics, where two particles have entanglement. So it could be that far, but they are entangled together. If you turn one, and it could be a million miles away, and it's the same thing. Now, someone came up with another theory. He said, well, it's not really entanglement. Those two particles were predestined. Everything has been predestined to work in a certain way. So that's the way it works. So what control do we have? Taking that analogy a little bit further, what control do we have? And I think it's a freedom of choice, not a freedom of thought. I think we're given the thought and we choose. You know, if you look at Buddhism, Hinduism, even Christianity, so we have a freedom of choice. Which thought process shall we go down? But that's a very helpful, very interesting book. You know, you can see I'll highlight all sorts of things in there, you know.
Yeah, I'm working my way through that one as well. In fact, I've told myself I have to finish that one before I can start the Michael book. So, but I remember that verse too, where, you know, that you're citing about, where he talks about that the transition from the, you know, from the priest, being that the soul comes into this world, they come into the mother as earth mother, sort of thing. Now there are some souls that may actually go back to the father, and other ones stay here at the mother. But as you were talking, and you know, that struck me as well, but as you were talking, I remembered, I think it's in the Gospel of Philip, there's this rather odd phrase where one of the followers asks Jesus, you know, for like, you know, really, what do I have to do to get some, you know, riches so I can pay my bills or something like that? And Jesus's response is, well, if you want something that hasn't been given to you, go ask your mother.
Yes.
And people, you know, wonder, but this Nestorian makes really sense if he's talking about, you know, this sort of dualistic, and or talking about, you know, really earth mother. Yeah. And the great these people during that time, everybody also worship a lot of the great mother cults were big. So it's asking that is the mother that's always
And I wonder if
there.
the same mother is referring to when Jesus is on the cross. He says, "Mother, here, take your son."
Mm.
Now, I don't think he's referring to Mary. I think he's casting his tomb back to the mother. Here, take it, because she does. In this book here, it says, I mean, it's not. These are not opinions. This is translations.
Yeah.
What they found, Manichaean as well. A lot of that there. But what they're saying is, the mother, though she creates, she devours, and she makes it look like nothing has happened. So you go into the garden full of flowers. Someone could have died there recently, and they've been buried. They put the grass back and the flowers on, and nothing happened. And it's a cruel world, and it seems to be coming. It's like the old story, why humans were created. You know, as a there's a few stories, but one is a celebration, isn't it, of the marriage between the mother Eve at the earth and Yaldabaoth. You know, this is and because Yaldabaoth abandoned her, she takes it out on her babies, which is us. So she punishes us. So the evil is coming from the feminine, i.e., from the left. Fascinating.
Pam, can I ask a question? Because you know, in your kind of blurb about tonight, you asked a really interesting question about, are these orders still relevant? You know, because this is a good question, isn't it? You know, because I think we've been pondering this question about, you know, we are currently organized as a church, but is that the best way to teach Gnosticism now? Yeah, I was just pondering that, you know. The danger, of course, is that if you don't go with this model, then you have to come up with another one, and you end up doing something similar, probably, but just with slightly different labels. But I did wonder about that, because you were asking that as a question. What do you think?
Yeah, I wonder about it at times. I certainly think I think that the old way we'd been teaching it needs to be redone. I don't think that works anymore. Well, it hasn't worked well since I became involved with the church over 20 years ago. It had, you know, the curriculum for how do we train clergy wasn't really working then. And people had taken a number of times to try to fix it. And the part of the problem is, let me share an example so you can see what I'm talking about here. Okay. This is an example of what would be some of the training for the porter or the doorkeeper. And part of the problem was that first off, it assumes that everybody has a Roman Catholic background. Okay. That's one thing. And then we go through a series of just reading of religious and then instructions that you would be working with somebody, with a pastor or something, and reading texts on theoretical, some practical application because you're working hand in hand, and then writing some papers and more reading and studying. And this was all done with the idea that people would be doing it similar to a sort of a correspondence courses, as correspondence courses were done in 1980. And while some things are still appropriate, the whole method was falling apart when, 20 years ago. And one of the problems was with the reading was because this was created during a time when it was hard to find Gnostic material. That is not a problem these days. The problem is winnowing things out and deciding what still works. And I think we we had tried a lot of trying to keep things up to date with adding in new material that is available. But the problem is, of course, there's so much of that becomes almost a job in itself. And it also gets at that people are learning in different styles these days, and there's opportunities for more interaction like we're doing now. So I think that a lot of this can be replaced, especially through the minor orders, can be replaced with workshops and workshops and some online classes, discussion, and that, if you're talking about training clergy. Now, some other things have to happen, I think, if we're talking about orders, and, and I think one of the reasons why I wonder about whether these orders, because also as we looked at it, it was only about people becoming clergy so they could become priests. And this was developed a lot in the US, where there's first off, becoming a priest in the US has a lot of little perks with it. It's easier to start your own church. It's easier to get nonprofit status. It's easy to get, your tax-free license. You can start deducting part of your house. There's a lot of, as well as people doing this honestly, but there's a lot of perks. There are places, there are states that make it very easy to set up monasteries. So a lot of having these sort of credentials is important in the States. Here, I don't know. I took the reverend off one of my business cards for my astrology because it was scaring people, thinking I was going to try to convert or proselytize them, So I think, I wonder whether or not these sort of things really work, or these are about structure and organization. And it's not getting at the thing of like, what do I need as an individual to ascend? What do I need to further my pursuit of gnosis, to aid me on my evolutionary trail? I don't think this did that. I know it didn't do that. I've never seen it do that. So the potential may have been there, but out of all the folks I've seen go through, I haven't seen it work.
Because to me, it kind of feels like a lot of the spiritual work could be done via the minor orders, and then the major orders seem to have a function in relation to communicating to other people, but not necessarily to do with the inner work, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I think that's it. I think it's almost like I see some of the clergy parts almost like in Montessori schools. They talk about, instead of having teachers, they have directors or directresses. And that's really kind of what the clergy needs to do. But it's not fulfilling this sort of need. Yeah, to hasten people on that, more of those spiritual elements. And yeah, within the minor orders, those things are all there. Now there are little things, no, they're not little things, but there are ceremonial functions that you really get in the major orders. And I think the modern day person who's called to Gnosticism is more interested in that whole spirit, the spiritual guts of what's going on, rather than organizations or ceremonies. Um,
Yeah.
you know, and that's why I think, that's why I wonder about this, because this isn't, this, we look at religious, it's a theoretical, written, gematria, okay. But where is, you know, where is that spirit?
Where's the heart in all of
Where's
this?
the heart? Yeah, yeah. And this is the porter. So this is that, where is that sense of crossing over the boundaries?
Mm,
You know,
mm.
there's so much these days out there, like on the whole idea of limits and the boundary worlds, getting between the veils. You
If
know,
I
things
if I compare this to something that would be done in a kind of pagan context or a magical context, each of those grades, their primary focus would have to be you experiencing something internally that embodies the grade. Otherwise, it's pointless. You know, it's like if you're an exorcist, you're going to have to work out how to cleanse yourself and your environment.
Yeah.
You've got to know how to do that as part of that grade.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot we can learn by some of the, how some of the pagan groups do this. Several festivals ago, I can't remember which one. I would often go to these, to go to the solstice or the pagan festivals at our local Dilston Physics Garden up here, which is run by the orders of the bards, the Druidic Bard Order. I forget what their name is.
The Order of Bards, Ovates,
The
and
Order of the
Druids.
Bards Ovates, yeah. So it's run by them, and one of the women had just kind of received the highest sort of grade in their initiatic thing.
Yeah.
But it was something that she kind of constructed by herself. It wasn't that there weren't these lessons like this for one to go through. There wasn't the talking so and so and so and so into, yes, we agree that we need another priest or we need our bishop. It was about developing herself and coming to these ability, proving and demonstrating levels of art and poetry, you know, and this sort of personal work. And I thought it was quite beautiful as she was describing it.
Yeah.
And she was shining. Maybe because she was on Zoom and she didn't have to, compete with those who were verbally more assertive. But she, I thought that's a lovely thing. And yeah, and as Gnostics, it should be about what you're getting and gaining as an individual. Yeah.
I find the one item which the people have difficulty with, and I'm thinking of two guys now on the Gnostic Cafe, and they've been on there for quite a while. It is to understand the difference of the God in the Old Testament and the Father in the New. I mean, that's a big jump for people.
Yeah.
With one of the guys, he's into meditation, Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, the ancient scriptures, Gnosticism. But I mean, after 2 or 3 years, I realized he doesn't understand the difference. And then we have another guy who came on, has been studying for quite a while, and they're confused. There's confusion there because they see an attempt, maybe they don't see the attempt, but to create a monotheistic God throughout the Bible. But it's confusing them as they're getting deeper into this, And I mean, I can think of 3 like this recently in the last year, 2 in the last half a year, who can't make that jump. And because if they can't make the jump, the rest of it is confusing for them. They don't understand, where the mind is, where the light is. What does it mean? Who's this God, the creator? And they're mixing this up with the Father. And how do you bring in these people and give them the theoretical knowledge? Because this is a shock for people.
I think from my point of view, Warren, and it's only my take on it, but I think the problem is the really good thing about the Gnostic Church, the French Gnostic Church, is that it existed before the Nag Hammadi library was found. So it evolved out of Hermeticism and Freemasonry, and it said to people, hey, here's Gnosticism in a kind of packaged form. And it was much more, people were, and here's a system you can work through to understand it more. The moment that the Nag Hammadi hit, you've got such a complex cosmology to try and understand, and it's vast. And frankly, in the 20th century, we've had the whole birth of the New Age movement. So it kind of crosses over such a vast territory. And I think people just get lost in how complex it is. Whereas I think, you know, if you look at, arguably, Pam's going to disagree with me here, but I'm going to brace myself. Arguably, the French Gnostic Church isn't that Gnostic. You know, if you looked at if you judged it in terms of the Nag Hammadi library, it's much more, it's less dualistic, it's more hermetic, it's more Freemasonic. It's got, but all of that stuff helps people get their head around it. I don't know, is that fair, Pam?
I think it's fair. I think it's fair because when the church was first founded, there was very minimal scriptures available. People were mostly at that point using, the founders were using what was available by the writings of the early church fathers. And there were a few translations of parts of the Pistis Sophia and the Book of Jude floating around. That was it. But like my consecrators, my bishops, teachers, they had practiced, the folks out of Haiti and out of Brazil, they had actually practiced the Gnosticism pretty much with nothing but the Gospel of John. And a person can take the Gospel of John, and with maybe somebody who kind of understands it to help you translate it from its mystical settings, and start getting a handle on Gnosticism and that sort of mysticism. I think, you know, to Lord's question, it's rather, for me, it's, you know, I think this is where Steve probably has a better insight, or maybe Dinah, because they have more of an evangelical Christian background. I was actually, when I was in Sunday school, my Sunday school teachers were openly asking the question of whether the God of Jesus was the God of the Old Testament. So I, from a very early age, had that possibility in mind. And I think the teachers, Sunday school teachers, did that because then it saved them from having to get into some rather brutal and nasty ethical questions about the behavior of Jehovah in the Old Testament. But if you leave it open and say, well, when Jesus is crying, Abba, Father, is his Abba, Father Jehovah, who called for the destruction of all these innocent people, or told Lot to offer his daughters for gang rape? Well, then it's a lot easier. Life becomes a lot easier to focus on the gospel. You know?
But also, I think from my perspective, you know, and I did a degree in biblical studies, you know, the people like Marcion in the 2nd century said there was this strict distinction between the Old Testament God and the Father that Jesus was talking about. But even if you know the Old Testament, and I love the Old Testament, the God of Isaiah is not the God of the book of Genesis, you know. So across the 1500, 2000 years of the Old Testament literature, you can see the evolution of God, from being this tribal, barbaric, fairly vicious character to this compassionate father is already there in the later Old Testament script. So I think, Warren, at least my take on it is that we don't have to replicate what Marcion said in the 2nd century. We can say, hey, this was an evolutionary process, and Jesus encapsulated it as the Logos, and he had this profound revelation about, he brought it to fruition, basically.
Yeah, I think that is a good point of the evolution. I love the Odes of Solomon and a lot of the wisdom literature, which is certainly pre-Christianity. But one can see elements of Gnosticism, and you can see elements of early Kabbalah in it. And I think it's those are collections of works that a lot of modern Gnostics just bypass, and there's so much in them.
Yeah, and as people from a Protestant background who don't believe in the intertestamental literature, the Apocrypha, the Deuterocanonical books, which are in the Catholic Bible, they're missing all that literature that was in between the Old Testament and the New Testament. So there's that period where you can still see, as you say, that theological evolution. It's still there.
It's still there.
To throw a spanner in the works, I was looking at pre-Christianity, pre-Buddhism, and what actually, and my research tends to point towards where all the spiritual revelations came from, and it seems like it came from India, and we're going back as far as 8,000 years ago. Now, when India was under British rule, I've done a book on India, but I didn't look at that aspect of it. What they used to do, they used to burn a lot of the Indian spiritual text to boil water, for example, or in the cold season to warm the building. So they had volumes of paper with all the spiritual knowledge written down, and these were burned. I was speaking to a professor, a friend of mine. He looks after the Vedic studies in Manchester and for the whole of the UK. Professor Malwell is a nuclear scientist, and then we have his partner, Dr. Poonam. They both live in Manchester, and we've had some good discussions. And the precepts that Jesus talks about, this is Buddhism, this is also Hinduism. So, and then we've got the claims that Jesus went to India, we discussed before. It just makes me wonder. It's a massive subject, as you mentioned, Steve, and you open one door and you can't go back again. You've got to go down there and have a look for more, because it becomes fascinating. It's our quest for knowledge. I mean, this is it. How do I define what Gnosticism is to people when they say you're a Gnostic? Okay, what does that mean? And I think, where do I start? Do I start, well, there's two different gods here? I can't. You can't start that way, because it's too shocking, really, for many people. Or what's the foundations of Christianity? Now, that's the other thing. How political is it? Why was Christianity, or the Christianity that they want to establish, established? And why did they hide all the spiritual knowledge coming out of India? All the gurus.
Yeah.
Sounds like another discussion, Warren. It sounds like we need a whole evening for that.
I think that's right. I think there's so much. Part of being a Gnostic is this sort of quest for knowledge. And then, so a lot of this is, yes, we're all part of it in the book knowledge. And then there gets to be a point where you feel like you're bubbling up. And like Blavatsky says, you guys just put all the books to the side for a while and go out and sit in nature. Yeah. and let yourself contemplate, the higher stuff that come. come to it that way.
The curious thing about this, Pamela, Steve, Dinah, is yeah, we have the historical Jesus and we have these physical figures in our mind. Well, we perceive these. And I believe they were historical figures. I do. There's records there. But the same thing, the analogy, you can make it, it's all in the mind. You know, it's a mind creation. When you read these spiritual books, it's equally as important that these entities, these archetypes exist in a physical form and not just as a mental image or a mental level. You know, you can go down the two, there's duality again. You can go down the physical route or the spiritual route. And I'm thinking, yeah, I mean, I'm fascinated. So it's still confusing in certain areas, or it's bedeviling me. You know, look at the aeons and sasages and the structure of the light kingdom. And there's just two ways of looking at this. So I have to package this information. I have to say, okay, like Jesus on the cross, was he crucified? Or was it an illusion like Mead actually wrote the translation about? Or was he replaced, as the Muslims say, by Simon the Twin? You know, was it this optical illusion? Did he actually survive? So there's all these packages of information. Which one is right? And it's great discussion, you know, and I don't drink beer, but over a pint of beer, you can have some marvelous discussions on this.
It's like as you were talking about that, started visualizing that it's actually the two strands of the helix of knowledge and spirituality, kind of.
Yeah, fascinating.
Okay.
And that's the problem. A guy on the Gnostic Cafe, Luke, he says, Warren, he comes on the phone and we have long conversation. He was on the phone last week. Where do I start? Where do I stop? I said, it's a lifelong experience. You just carry on learning and you're developing your own model, really, of what it's all about. So use a famous quotation from Syllaback, what's it all about, Alfie? So you develop your own model, really. But I felt sorry for Luke. He's a typical Londoner. He's got that London accent, you know, like Michael Caine had. He comes on the phone like that, like, you know, a bit of a gangster type accent. Chicago style accent, you know.
Right, folks, I'm going to head off. Lovely to see you all.
Great to see you, good Steve. And we'll be doing some litany and worship stuff next time with Mary Magdalene.
Great. I'll look forward to it. That'll be lovely. Okay. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Look, where do we get the film The Prophecy from?
Actually, when I was looking for the clip of it, there's like the full movie version is there on YouTube.
Really?
Yeah, so if you put in The Prophecy movie, yeah, you might have to put in Christopher Walken as well. There was very quickly, there came up the full movie was there on YouTube. And this was just like a couple days ago.
I'll take a look at that.
And yeah, it's yeah, I don't want to not to trash. I don't want to destroy it because there's a lot of, but there's a lot of interesting things in it. I watched it just recently again.
Well, I'd like to watch it when my wife gets back. I mean, the only things we do watch about 10 o'clock at night is Star Trek, Voyager, Star Trek, to take us away from this misery, you know. And something like The Prophecy would be also on the bill. Dinah, what have you got to say about this discussion tonight? Because I know you sit there like a wise owl.
I know.
Knowledge. I don't know what you do with it.
With it, I just absorb it, and then I know that, you know, in the week I'll go, oh, okay, yeah. So yeah, I just listen to you wise souls.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Do you have an objective of learning certain areas of Gnosticism?
No, I'm not at the present moment.
You just like to learn everything you can, eh?
Yeah.
Do you find it confusing certain areas of Gnosticism?
You talking to me, yeah. No, at this present moment, I think it's best just to play safe and just trust the process. Because if I get confused or trying to be something that I'm not, or I'm just going with the flow and just following. I think that's the best step, and try and be as real as possible with the information, and not trying to get it, just allowing it to naturally come to me when it does. And it probably is already in me and doing the work that it needs to do. I don't even need to be to talk about it or be aware of it. So.
What particular books do you like that you've read? Have you looked at the Gospel of Mary?
Yeah, I have got the Gospel of Mary. I can't seem to find it at this present moment in time, but I do have the Gospel of Mary. I am reading the Yellow Book. Is it the Introduction to Gnosticism? Yeah, so I have got that. Yeah. And I do have is it the Charles Leadbeater that you talked about?
Mhm.
Yeah, I've got that book as well. So I did look up the major and the minor orders in there as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Science of the Sacraments, that's the one?
That's the one, yeah.
That's a 600-page book.
It's a long book.
Yeah.
It's a weighty book.
Do you highlight text like I do in the books?
Sometimes I do and sometimes I don't. Sometimes I write notes.
Oh, you do write notes, yeah.
On a book.
Interesting. And have you read the by any books by Mead, G.R.S. Mead?
Mead. I don't think so. I'm not sure.
Ivan Blavatsky. Mead was an incredible guy, very intellectual, and he was a translator as well. I don't know what languages he translated it from, but I think he did his work on the Pistis Sophie was excellent. There were other attempts before him, but he made it very readable and understandable. And his depth of knowledge in spirituality is incredible. Now, I don't know how many books he did in his lifetime. Leadbeater did 69, but when he was one of the founder members of the Theosophical Society, wasn't he, Pamela? And
he was an early member.
An early member.
And when I give my talk on the 7th, he's going to figure prominently. Yes.
When you say again.
I'm giving a talk on the 7th.
Really?
On Theosophy and Gnosticism to the Theosophical Society of the Philippines. So I will send everybody a link once I have the information for that.
Yeah.
Have their Zoom link.
Well, I wrote a little article on Charles Leadbeater from Stockport because he is also one of the people. That book by Charles Webster Leadbeater. He was a bishop. He came from Stockport, where I lived. In fact, the college I went to, he was born around the corner, literally 100 yards away. And then he left and he met Blavatsky, and they set up the Theosophical Society at the same time in New York and London. And then he took it over to India, to what is Madras, or they call it Chennai now. And Annie Besant, she was around at the time, and there's a road in India named after Annie Besant. And Charles Leadbeater, and his statue is next to Gandhi in Madras there, And he went on to build 2 colleges, and one of the colleges in Sri Lanka, or Ceylon at the time, has 6,000 students in there. It's called Ananda College. So he led a very interesting life, and he was self-taught. And when you read his books, you think this guy has got a handle. He's a wordsmith, you know, self-taught wordsmith and spirituality. And we were talking about this, Pamela, weren't we? He probably got his inner knowledge from clairvoyance. He was a
Yeah.
clairvoyant.
Yeah, he was quite the clairvoyant. And what's interesting about Leadbeater, he wrote a number of books with Annie Besant about thought forms and about auras, that New Age and chakras.
Yeah.
So when New Age people are talking about these things, they're actually quoting the colors and the correspondences that came from Leadbeater. They're not talking about traditional Vedic understandings of like chakras and that. So it's yeah, it's kind of interesting of how much sort of New Age thinking actually goes back to the Theosophical Society.
Incredible.
But Helen Blavatsky was very interested in Gnosticism. And her understanding comes from a book written by Charles Kingsley. Wrote this book of Gnostics and Their Remains. And he wrote the first edition around 1867, and that's where there was like a little bit of a few translations of the Pistis Sophia in there. But he's the one who made this link between ancient wisdom, Gnosticism, and the Templars and the Masons and that. And he had 2 other editions during like Blavatsky's lifetime that he published. But a lot of her understanding of the transition came from him. And it's available as a PDF. You can Google.
I think I like to read the book because I like to highlight the words in the book, you know. Yeah, that was a topic I was going to mention. I'll have to go in a minute, but old books, you know, like this one we're talking about is not really old, it's 1962. But I have one on Jesus Going to India, written in 1890, 1900. There's value in all these old books.
Yeah.
We tend to ignore these books, these research. You know, it's like modern day research. We tend to ignore, and there's so much good stuff which has been written there, yet we've lost. You know, or we just don't use. I'm wondering if there's any old books that you could recommend, Pamela.
Oh.
You know, going back to the 1850s, 1860s, 70s.
I've got some that are quite old here. I have to look and think about that. But there's so much that's been done before that haven't been, that people forget about. And where was it? I was with some sort of chat where we were talking about how many of the English mystics people don't read or don't know about, like the Cloud of Unknowing. Wonderful mystical text that was written in Britain, you know, so we have English as a language. And then like the works of Charles Bima. But the conversation we were talking about Jane Lead, who wrote these. A lot of her writings are almost like guided imagery sort of writings, and she's writing in the 17th century. And some of these wonderful, there's a series she calls Enochian Walks, which are kind of her walking in nature and some of the revelations that kind of come from it. But it's also this encouraging individuals to kind of open up themselves to the revelations that are available, you know, on the divine. And very few of, you know, modern people read that or read Jacob Bema. But I can see why. I think the problem with Jacob Bema is his stuff is great, but the English translations are rather poor. So all the English translations you come across of Bema are all, all from the Victorian times. And they're all cloaked in all of this, sort of hell and brimstone sort of terminology. That's a real turnoff. Unless you've got this sort of a comfort zone with reading, with being able to pick out the wheat from the shaft and going with this sort of really, it's kind of heavy-handed language. But he writes about Sophia. And how does one get in touch with Sophia, in his works? It's on my list that someday to take some, if no one does it first, to take some of these translations of Bema and rewrite them out in modern mystical language.
Go for you, Dinah.
There you go. It is, yeah. It needs somebody with a gentle hand and a modern perspective to probably do nothing more than transcribe these. Even if one can't read German, to do it no Germans have obviously done it yet who could do it. So it might take somebody who's reading the translations to do it.
Well, that's interesting because I used to have a bishop on our WhatsApp cafe. He left, but I've got his telephone number, email. Is Leopold, and he's Polish, but he's been living in Germany for so many years. That's the sort of job he could do. Well, he's trying to go to live in the Alps near Munich. So instead of doing nothing and meditating all day long, he could do this.
Yeah. I think the world really needs, and I've been other lists and people are saying, people who are fans of Jacob Bema, the world really needs a good, sensitive English translations of his work.
How do you spell his name?
Oh, with Jacob?
Oh, Jacob. Okay.
The Bema. Usually it's spelled Boehme. He was writing in Germany about 2 generations after Luther, and about the point where people had recognized that the Luther's Reformation wasn't quite as radical as they had hoped. But he was always drawn to the spiritual and the mystical, but his father wouldn't let him become a pastor because he said, no, he says, you're a third son, you've got to earn a good living. You can't be wasting your time being a pastor. So he apprenticed him out to being a shoemaker. And one day when the master is gone, the boss is gone, this man comes to the shoemaker shop and tells Jacob Bema that I want you to make me a pair of shoes. And can make you a pair of shoes so they'll be ready, in 2 days. And Bema said, well, don't you want to wait for the boss? He can probably do a better job. And the guy says, no, I want you to make them. So he makes the shoes. The guy comes back. And when he picks up the shoes, and at that point, he reaches out and he touches Bema on the head, takes his shoes, walks away. Bema turns, and all of a sudden, it's wham. He gets the cosmic download and understands he understands everything, how it all works, God's mechanisms, what God wants us to do, the role of everything. but it takes him 25 years to find the words for what he's been given and put it down into a book. And during that time, he does teaching in that. So he talks a little bit about, and there's questions of where did he get this knowledge? It's like Blavatsky. Where did this come from? How does this shoemaker understand the inner workings of Kabbalah? How does he come to this sort of understanding of Sophia that's actually at his time would only be available would be in very few circles at all. So how does this happen? Well, the easy answer is that, he was truly a divine download that, he absorbed in.
Well, this is what the Buddhist monks do, don't they? Once you still the mind, once you achieve stillness of the mind, this is when all the knowledge is given to you. And somehow, it's amazing, because I do believe in these unique stories, because strange things do happen. I don't mean it's the X-Files at all, but these, I believe that this does happen. You meet people with unusual stories, and they're true. And that's intriguing. And that's Jacob Bowman.
Yeah.
I'll take a look into his work.
Yeah, he's written there's a huge work he wrote called Aurora. As that day that dawns. But then there's smaller works such as the Supersensual Life and the Three Keys. There's a number of other works, but they're all available as PDFs, downloads, and on websites and that.
In German.
They're available in English. They're just very difficult for a lot of people to read, because you have to kind of get over this heavy-handedness of the translators. It's a problem. And
kindly excuse me. There's some people I have to help.
They let you go. I let Dinah go, and plus my hearing aids have just gone off too. So if I start to get really loud, it's because I can't hear myself right now.
So maybe we don't need the Zoom to hear you now.
That's right. They can probably hear me across the river in Newcastle right now.
Okay, so until next time, and do give me a link when you're ready to do that one with the Philippines.
Okay, I will do that. Okay. And I'll let everybody know. And then, so next time would be Mary Magdalene. So anyone has any ideas or special things they'd like to say with Mary Magdalene in general, but we'll probably do a little bit of a litany at least.
Yeah, I think Mary Magdalene is excellent. I do believe some readings, and maybe in that secret book of Adam here, where it says she was the equivalent of Jesus. What he wanted the disciples to be, to achieve their own Christ, if you see what I mean. And many people believe she was the right-hand man of Jesus Christ. There's a book I've been reading. It's called The Secret Mary. And I think the way these two ladies from Yorkshire wrote this book was based on the information that we can find about Mary and Jesus and the research that's gone on. And they've woven a good story. Now, they also said they've got it from meditation. But when I read it, you know when a story is totally made up, and you know when there's some truth in it and certain beliefs in it. And when I read this, you can say it's quite possible that's what's happened. They've had certain ingredients and they wove it together in a very believable way. Mm-hmm. And because it says they got married. Now, Oxford University, they found a piece of paper about 10, 15 years ago, papyrus, and on the back of it, it said it was a story about Jesus with Mary on their honeymoon on the Sea of Galilee. I don't know if you read this. But
no, I haven't read
it. They had a matrimonial argument, okay, and because the honeymoon wasn't very fancy.
Was it about Peter? I would imagine that Mary Magdalene would have had quite a bit of argument, something to say about Peter.
Oh no, this is about Jesus. I would imagine, yeah, I tend to agree about Peter. So, but this is about Jesus because she was complaining that it wasn't a very fancy honeymoon, and they're on the boat. I mean, this is a boat trip across the Sea of Galilee. That's not bad for a honeymoon. And he said, you know, he reminded her. He said, "I've come here to do the work of my Father," and that's the way he told her. But in this book here, I've only read bits and pieces, but there's a passage, a chapter where they got divorced. Because when you think about it, Jesus can't be married. You know, there's a lot of texts which, like the Buddhists and the Hindus, if you're going to achieve heaven, you can't be married. You know, the Catholics believe the same thing, don't they? You know, procreation, creating more matter. And in fact, in Gnostic scriptures, Jesus says, do not create any more matter. I think that's in the Pisces Sophia.
Yeah, it's in the,
But apparently they had a child and she went off after they got, it was an amicable split. It wasn't a split which was, I don't want to be with you anymore. It was a split to do with, that was a destiny. You know, she had to go that way. He understood that. And he had to go the other way. And I don't know. I read it and I think, well, it meets what they found in, you know, what they translated in Oxford. Have a look on the internet, the translation they found.
yeah.
At Oxford University about 10 years ago. And in fact, what they did, they couldn't see it, but they x-rayed it, and they actually brought up the text, and then they translated it, and they were quite surprised, really. Yeah. So yeah, I think Mary Magdalene.
Yeah, it's her feast day next meeting, 2 weeks from now. So it's a good time.
Yeah, very important. I think Mary Magdalene, very important. Yeah, so it's a good subject. I like it.
Okay. Well, see everybody then.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. Bye-bye, everyone. Have a good day. Take
Bye.
care. Stay cool.